just let me know when you're coming. I can meet you.
Go ahead, you're on the air.
Okay, hold on. Tell me if you can hear me. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Go ahead, you're on the air.
It's the old Northwood High School. We're just down from Centennial.
Bonjour and welcome to WASA Distance Education. This is PLAR English and I'm Andrea. So today we are going to start off talking about assignment 15 because we didn't quite finish it last time. Then we'll talk about assignment 16. So just so that you know, last class we finished with assignment 14. And assignment 14 focused on different parts of a newspaper article, specifically the headline, the picture, and the caption. But tonight we're focusing on the lead, the audience, the writer's purpose, and then the main information. So the main information for a newspaper article is who, what, when, where, why, and how. So just so that you know, because we're also talking about short stories this evening, short stories are structured differently than newspaper articles, but we can use the same strategies to find the information that we need in order to answer the reading comprehension questions. So I'll go ahead and start reading this newspaper article. And remember that this is just an example that we're using in class. So when you actually do assignment 15, there will be a different article that you will read from your textbook, and then there will be questions that you'll answer in your workbook. So we'll actually be looking at the same questions, but we're going to be answering them for this other example. So let me start just by, I'll just go ahead and read the whole article. When 14-year-old Colby Moose of Poplar Hill First Nation made his first toss in a softball throwing competition in Lac Seul, Scott Haynes could not believe it. "Holy smoke," said Haynes, a track and field coach who coached Team Ontario at the last 2 North American Indigenous Games. When it left his hand, it just launched. The competition was part of an event organized by Haynes to qualify the local youth to compete in the Hershey Track and Field Games, HTFG, a North American youth sports competition in Hershey, Pennsylvania, where 480 athletes compete. Haynes had tried to bring a local team to an HTFG event in Thunder Bay, but could not make the arrangements. So he contacted an HTFG representative to see if he could set one up in Lac Seul. So she just said, "We have it at your school there and register the event," he said. The kids did the softball throw and standing long jump. Every student at the local school took part, but it was Moose who stole the show. Right after the first throw, we knew it was something pretty good, Haynes said. Moose's toss reached a distance of 202 feet and 8 inches. After Haynes submitted the scores to HTFG, he discovered Moose finished second in his age group in Ontario. Last year, he would have been third at HTFG in Hershey, Haynes said. Remember, that's that meet in Pennsylvania that they mentioned earlier that they're trying to qualify for. Unfortunately for Moose, only the first place finishers are invited to Hershey, but Moose has no hard feelings about not making the games. "I felt good about it," he said of his toss. Moose said he plays mostly baseball in the summer months back home in his community and hockey in the winter. Sports come naturally for the grade 8 student. Asked if there was any special technique or trick to his long throws, he said, "I just throw it." Moose could not only throw at long distances, but with some speed as well. A local police officer took out a radar gun and recorded Moose's throw. He tossed at a speed of 99 kilometers per hour or 60 miles per hour. A kid like this, he could be a professional baseball player, Haynes said. And while Moose would love to play sports as a career, would he prefer baseball or hockey? Hockey, probably, he said. So for anybody that can see the screen, you probably noticed that I have some information along the right-hand side, and then also down here on the bottom. And when you're reading, so you have 2 options. You can read the whole thing through like I'm doing, or you can look at the questions before you start, and then read it. So as you're reading, if we're talking about reading comprehension, you want to know what kind of information you're looking for. And I highly recommend reading the article or story or whatever it is that you're reading, read it more than once. We don't have time to read this more than once today in class, But you can see that this is a story, and there's certain information that we can answer. So let's look at the first question. So the question says, what important information is in the lead? So the important word here is this word lead. I'll just underline it so that you can see. All right. So we're talking about the lead. And specifically, when we're talking about the lead, we're talking about the very first paragraph. Okay, so this is the very first paragraph. So when you answer question 1 and it says what important information is in the lead, what you want to do is you want to focus on the information that's in this very first paragraph. Okay, so, and then you want to answer in a complete sentence. So let's look at an example here, right? And maybe I'll just read the lead one more time. So this is what the very first paragraph says. When 14-year-old Colby Moose of Poplar Hill First Nation made his first toss in the softball throwing competition in Lac Seul, Scott Haynes could not believe it. All right, so what we have here is we have information about who, right, and a little bit of information about where it happened and what was happening. And then we need to take that and answer in our own words. So you could say something like this. We could say, the lead tells me that there was a 14-year-old boy named Colby Moose of Poplar Hill First Nation who had his first throw in a competition, and the coach was surprised. So that's one way to answer that question. Now, another thing to note is that I read the whole article through, and that's a really good thing to do, especially if you get a question like this. Question 2 says, who would be an appropriate audience for this article? So another way to word this question would be to say, who would want to read the article? Right? So this article is all about young people trying to qualify for these games in Pennsylvania, right? So and it's a softball throwing competition. So maybe, for example, if we're looking at one answer that we could give, we could say that an appropriate audience would be people that like sports. So really anybody that likes sports would be interested in reading about this. So I'll continue on. Now another question that you would need to read the whole article for would be a question like number 3. What was the writer's purpose for writing this article? So anytime we have a newspaper article, the person writing that article wants to tell us about something. So that's a really easy way to think about it, right? What does the person who wrote the article, right, the person that went out there and did the interview and asked the questions, what are they trying to tell people about? So we could say something like this. We could say, the writer wrote this article because he wanted to tell people about the softball throwing competition and to say how talented Colby Moose was, right? I actually really enjoyed reading this article because I'm always interested in sporting accomplishments that anybody has. So it was really impressive to hear about Colby's story. And, you know, if I was interested in softball, then the fact that there's a throwing competition, that might make me more interested in reading the article too, right? So there's always a reason why somebody writes about something, why they write a newspaper article, right? So so this answer would work really well, right? That the author wanted to tell people about the competition and also explain how talented Colby Moose was. Okay, so now the next part here is it says identify the 5 W's and H from this article. So what you would do is you would read the article again and you could find the information. Now we're going to kind of do the opposite here. I'm going to show you the answer and then I'm going to underline where we got that answer from. I think that'll be the most efficient way to go through this. So when we talk about the 5 W's and H, we're talking about who, what, where, when, why, and how. So we're thinking about who was involved. So an example answer would be the article is about Colby Moose. So I'm just going to go back to the first page. So, you know, you could be using a highlighter, and I'm just underlining because I find that underlining comes out better in the after-class notes. So we figured out who, right? Colby Moose is who. All right. So there's our answer for that first question about who there. And this is what you could do, right? You could look at your questions before you start reading, and you could be finding the answers as you go, or you could just think about what the answers might be and then find them after. So what was the article about? Well, here's one possible answer. The article is about a throwing competition. So if we go back to the first page, so sometimes, and this is a big hint, you can find some of the most important information in the lead, right? And that's what makes a newspaper article unique, is that it has different parts to it. And when we look specifically at the lead has quite a bit of the important information in it. Right, so if you know where the lead is, and you know that the lead is the very first paragraph, and then you're trying to answer questions, well, maybe you know the first place you might look is in the lead, in that first paragraph. Okay, so next question. So where did it take place? I think that's in the lead too. Let's see what I wrote for my example answer. The competition was in Lac Seul. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that was in the lead too. Looks like it. Right, yeah, in Lac Seul, there we go. Right, so you see just how much, there's quite a bit of information in the lead. And that's because that's the way a newspaper article is structured. So you have the lead to kind of establish what the whole thing's about, and then you have your details to kind of explain more fully. And then something interesting here is that at the end of the article, you see there's this very last paragraph here, well actually the last two. It talks about, you know, how Colby could be a professional baseball player, but then the question is asked, well, you know, would you rather play baseball or hockey? And Colby answers, well, hockey probably. And that's extra information, right? Remember, the whole article is about this softball throwing competition. So what's happening here is the person that did the research, the person that interviewed Colby, decided that it might be interesting to get a little bit of extra information from him, you know, just about what he likes to do for sports. And oftentimes, if there's any little extra information that doesn't have anything to do with the main idea, right? The main idea is that there's this softball throwing competition. But if there's extra information that the author thinks might be interesting for people to learn about, that extra information will be put at the very end. Okay, so anyway, back to when. So when did this take place? Well, I'll be honest with you. I've been going through this article for each term here, and it doesn't actually say exactly when it took place. But don't worry, because when you do assignment 15, it will say. And I would recommend looking in the lead first, okay? But all I can say here, just based on, and in the last assignment, in assignment 14, we saw a picture. Based on that, you could say it happened sometime in the spring. But you would know, you would get a month, right? It would say that in the article. All right, so we're almost done here, and then we can get on to our short story. So question 4 is why? In other words, why did the event happen? And I sort of already talked about this, but so the competition was held to see who would qualify for the games in Hershey, Pennsylvania, right? So, and we can go back and we can find that, and often finding why can be the most challenging thing to find. So, and it's actually here in the third paragraph. It says the competition was part of an event organized by Haynes to qualify the local youth to compete in the Hershey Track and Field Games, right? A North American sports competition in Hershey, Pennsylvania. Right. So if we're looking for all of the details here, this is where we can find them all. So that's why I say, you know, you might have to read the article more than once to find the information that you need to answer the question. So the competition was held to see who would qualify for the games in Hershey, Pennsylvania. So how did this happen? Well, let's look at, you know, usually you can figure this out. So the students went to a school in Lac Seul to compete. So you see, answering how kind of involves reading the whole article and figuring out, okay, well, you know, I mean, they couldn't have a competition without having a place to have that competition at, right? So that's where I get my answer from. The students went to a school in Lac Seul to compete. Okay, so now we are on to our short story comprehension. And I just want to mention quickly that this is, again, this is another example. This is different than what you'll see in your textbook when you do the assignment. So we're using this as an example, and we'll be going through all of the different short story elements as part of my explanation this evening. I just wanted to recognize and thank the author of Faces of Lake Superior for her permission to use this story. It's called Young's General Store. And I'd also like to thank Anita Young at Young's General Store for her blessing, because this is a true story from Wawa, Ontario. All right, so let me get started here. Now, I might say a few things as I'm reading this time. There's quite a bit that could be said about this. I'm excited to share it. And then we'll get into our short story elements and our different reading comprehension questions. So if you're wondering, well, what are the different elements of a short story? And if none of these are familiar to you, it's okay, because we'll be talking about them. So we'll be looking at things like characters, setting, conflict, plot, and we'll touch on theme. You don't actually need to understand theme in order to do assignment 16, but I will explain what the theme is. Right, so let me get started reading here. Young's General Store. A sign on Young's General Store in Wawa, Ontario proclaims, "There is no other place like this, so this must be the place." Inside, customers and visitors discover why. Bill Young is perched on the top of an empty milk can like a mischievous leprechaun. He speaks softly, almost in a whisper, yet the gleam in his eye gave a hint of tales to be told. He insisted that business is different in the bush, where it takes more nerve than dollars to operate. This is where he sometimes runs afoul of the law. Unless the 28-foot-tall, 2-ton statue of the Wawa wild goose that stands at the Welcome Center down the highway has made tracks again, Young has kept his tricks in check for quite a while. However, he promised the goose will walk again. Young's General Store is a weather-worn collection of buildings that houses almost everything a person ever thought of buying. Tacked on walls, stacked in aisles, piled in and on showcases are bear traps and boxing gloves, spices, cast iron skillets, eggs and open flats, lanterns hanging from the ceiling, an old treadle sewing machine, snowshoes, hard candy, scrub boards, horse collars, cookies from a tin sold by the pound. He sells grain in open bags, barley, buckwheat, beans, peas. Reach in and help yourself. Or fork a sour pickle from the open barrel that stands at the front door. Customers get entertainment while they shop, he says. People tie it to the good old days and old pleasant memories. During Young's youth, his grandfather operated a store east of Sault Ste. Marie. Young thought it might be fun to be a storekeeper, but he wanted a store with an old-fashioned air. The animals came by accident. I wonder, what does he mean by animals? Really interesting. We'll learn more. I just want to say a little bit about this first page. So often, when we talk about characters, right, so obviously we have a main character, right? We have Bill Young. Often, the characters get described near the beginning, so we learn about him. We learn he's mischievous. We learn a little bit about his personality. I'm sure we'll learn more as we read on. And then we also learn quite a bit about the setting, this store that he operated here, right? So often, you know, setting and character, they get described at the beginning. And obviously, you know, you can learn more about characters throughout the story. But if you're doing reading comprehension questions and you're trying to answer questions about the setting, look closer to the beginning. right? Or character, right? Look closer to the beginning for that too. But I always recommend reading the whole story. All right, so let me continue. Let's find out what's going on with these animals. His first store was a 20 by 28 foot structure, which he opened with an investment of $70 for taxes and goods on consignment. I bought a model cottage from the Indians, hauled it over with a school bus, and stocked up, he said. When summer came, weeds grew rapidly in the rocky front yard, weeds that Young had neither time nor inclination to mow. He decided to invest in a goat, which he hoped would keep the grass clipped short. Trouble started when he answered an advertisement for a goat, and the owner said, "Why don't you borrow my ass too?" Young did, and was soon charged with keeping a goat and a donkey at a business establishment. In answer to a complaint, police came and took my goat and donkey while my wife Anita was home alone, Young says. On his way to bail out his animals, Young made a detour to the local newspaper and placed an advertisement in the Lost and Found. He saved the clipping. "Someone got my goat and took my ass," brackets, donkey. Anyone knowing whereabouts of same, please notify Bill at Young's Gift and Bait Shop. Suspect believed to be driving a police cruiser. Business picked up as everyone came to see what the trouble was all about. Young says the advertisement and the resulting rush of customers is probably what prompted the visit from the police. However, by the time they arrived, the incident had landed in newspapers as far south as Toronto. The police learned that they couldn't have two charges on one summons, so they dropped the goat, he said. With the donkey trial set, Young renamed his animal Chief. He contended that Chief was a mule. Defense was that a mule was part horse, which was legal in Wawa. Meanwhile, more publicity was in the making. Young insists that he thought it only proper that he photograph his donkey mule horse. He drove to police headquarters and asked to borrow the police chief's uniform had for the pose. The chief walked in during negotiations and reclaimed his hat in a huff. He didn't have much of a sense of humor. Okay, so what's really neat about this story is that we can hear some of Bill Young's words. So what happened is the person that wrote this story went and met Bill Young and then talked to him and then wrote a story, this true story. And so this is actually what the words that Bill Young said here, right? He said he didn't have much of a sense of humor. That's just one thing that he said, right? So I just wanted to point that out. And you can see, for anyone that can see this, there are quotation marks around that, around the words "he didn't have much of a sense of humor." So the person that wrote this story sat down with Bill Young, and they talked about what happened. And the person that wrote the story took some of Bill Young's actual words. I have another note down here. It says that I underlined the important plot points. So you'll also have to answer a question about the plot. So the plot includes the main events in the story, right? And when we talk about plot, it only includes the actions that keep the story moving, all right? So you notice at the beginning, there's just description there about the setting and characters, but nothing happens yet. It's just description, all right? So anybody that can see the screen can see that I've underlined a few things. I've talked about him investing in a goat, he got a goat, right? And then so he got a goat and a donkey, right? And then he got in trouble for it, right? And he had to bail them out. And then he put an ad in the paper. And then everyone was interested because, you know, that's pretty interesting. I mean, how often do the police come to a store complaining about a goat and a donkey, right? And then, you know, there was this legal loophole, and I'll talk more about this later, but basically they could only charge him for one thing, but then he still had to go to trial because of the donkey, but then he got away with it because he said that his donkey, the mule, was part horse, and it was allowed to have they're allowed to have a horse. So he you can see that we learn more about Bill Young too, right? You can see that we could say that he pushed the limits of the law, that you know, he did everything he could to keep his business successful. So and he made it challenging for the police. I think this story is hilarious. I hope you've been enjoying it so far. Okay, so we're not done yet. We've got a few more things that happen here, so let me continue along. Young said he had other advertisements ready if he had lost his case. Remember, he had to go into court, right? Where he insisted that if he had to go to jail, so did the mule. Crown experts were called to Wawa to testify on the animal's classification. Charges for keeping animals at a business establishment were dropped, according to newspapers, when those persons involved couldn't distinguish between a donkey, ass, mule, and so on. Then there was excitement at the same store over geese, a bear, 1,500 chickens that didn't sell. So I traded for hogs and the big row over the pickle barrel. Ontario Department of Health officials did not take to open pickle barrels, which they considered unsanitary. Your theme of an old-fashioned general store is good, but you've let your business run away with you, they said. So these are things that the police said to Bill. While insisting that his salesmanship was not prompted by mischief, Young somehow held on to his pickle barrel. Then, near disaster struck. At 4 a.m. on April 4th, 1979, a 70-pound husky named Tonka woke the Youngs from deep sleep. The store attached to their living quarters was in flames. Almost everything was destroyed. They started to rebuild with very little insurance and not much time. They were up and into the store the last of June, except for windows. Young opened the store for business, trying to complete the building between customers. Plastic sheets were secured at night. Police moved in. They said the store was technically closed while it was completed and all inspections passed. Orders were to padlock. So he was supposed to keep his store closed until the renovations were completed, but that's not what he did. Let's hear what he did. Young fastened a padlock in the plastic and kept selling. Police padlocked the door, so Young rolled up the plastic over the window every morning and conducted business through the opening. Police threatened to board up everything, so Young got ready with another newspaper ad, chainsaw opening coming up. Sales flourished. I had TV coverage lined up from the Sioux if they jailed me, he said. The police were pulling rank. When the junior guy on the force was told he had to arrest me, he threatened to quit. It was cute. Somehow frontier justice prevailed, with everybody saving face, and further confrontation was avoided. Then there was the matter of the Wawa goose. Young admits one morning in the dawning light leading from the statue across the Welcome Center's parking area and down the highway. A highway crew was sent from the Sioux to paint over the tracks of the wayward nocturnal goose. That night, a phantom crew went out and painted tracks a second time with the addition of shiny, sparkling glass beads sprinkled into wet paint. Perched on his milk can, Young pokes at the fire in the big cast iron stove and glances furtively across the store before speaking softly, nodding knowingly. It's going to happen again soon, he says. It creates employment. The Wawa goose never walked again. Bill Young died in 1988. So there's a link to the website because it's a real store if you wanted to check that out after class. And let's get going on these reading comprehension questions here. And again, as I said, you know, when you're answering reading comprehension questions, you might need to read through a story several times. So let's just talk about, so we've got, here's one of our short story elements, right? One of them is the characters. So the characters are the who or the what that takes action, that takes action in the story, right? So in Young's General Store, Bill Young is the primary character. You can call him the protagonist, because he's the one who the story is mainly about, right? So now you won't have to answer a question about, you know, you won't have to say that he's the protagonist, but you will have to answer questions about what he was like, okay? I'm just giving you this information so that you know, I want to teach you a little bit about the different elements of a story. All right, so let's take full advantage of this. So he's a primary character, right, Bill Young, but there's secondary characters in the story too, and they're the animals or the police, right? So these are characters that are involved in the story, and without them there wouldn't really be a story, right? I mean, if it was just about Bill and nobody else was part of the story, it wouldn't be a very good story. And then there's even a tertiary character. So that's Bill's wife, Anita. So she's mentioned, right? When the fire happened, remember she was mentioned, and she has, you know, like a scene, like that's one scene when the fire happened, that's one scene in the story. So she's part of the story, but not crucial like the secondary characters, right? Like her name didn't have to be mentioned. I mean, it certainly made the story more interesting for sure, but I'm just saying that the story could have still been told without mentioning her name. Okay, so here's one example question. So this, and these questions are taken from what you'll actually have to answer for assignment 16, except of course we're using the example that I just read to you to answer them. And what I want you to focus on here is how I have answered in complete sentences. So half of your mark will be based on whether you've answered in a complete sentence, and then the other half of your mark will be based on whether you've answered the question correctly. So here's the first question. In 2 to 3 complete sentences, describe what Bill Young was like. Your answer should include at least 3 details, and it should be written in your own words. So remember, we got this information from the very beginning of the story, right? So if you're looking for information, and we learned a little bit more about him throughout the story about how, you know, he pushed the limits of the law. So here's an example of an answer. Bill Young was determined to make his store succeed. He wasn't afraid to push the limits of the law. He was mischievous. So you can see here, I have 3 sentences describing him. All you need to do, right? And I could have put 2 sentences, but I put 3, right? So I'm just describing him. Okay, so the next element is the setting, right? We learned a lot about the setting on that very first page. So the setting is where and when the story takes place. When you answer a question about the setting, you can talk about just the place, just the time, or both the place and the time. So we'll be talking about the place and the time in our example. So when we talk about place, the story, Young's General Store, takes place in Wawa, Ontario. We are told a lot about the store and what it looks like inside. We learn a little bit about Wawa too, right? But remember, this took place a long time ago, so I'm sure that Wawa is not the same as it used to be, right? So really, we learn mostly about place. Now, actually, there is a specific statement about when the fire happened, but other than that, we don't know too much about the time when it happened. So here's a question and an example answer. So the setting is the time and or place where the action occurs. Identify and give 3 details about the setting in this short story. Your answer must include a place or a time, and then information about what happened. Let me share this example with you. In the store, people came to see all of the animals. One night at 4 a.m., the store burned down. In court, Bill won and got to keep his donkey. All right, so here I have the place, right, in the store, and then I explain what happened in the store, that people came to see the animals. And then I have the time, a night at 4 a.m., and then I have what happened, is that the store burned down. So you can see that we can write sentences that give both those parts of the answer, right? So in court, another place, in court, Bill won and got to keep his donkey. Right, so it says give 3 details, right? So that's why I have 3 sentences there. Okay, now let's talk about conflict. There's quite a bit to know about the conflict, and I will be giving examples from the story. But conflict, so overall conflict, this is what happens that causes trouble or difficulty. There are different types of conflict, right? So you've got man versus man. So we're talking about when 2 people disagree with each other, right? So it could be any 2 people that disagree with each other. Man versus self, another name to call man versus self conflict is to say that it's an inner conflict. So an inner conflict happens when an individual struggles with something personally, right? So maybe they're thinking about something and they're not sure what to do or how to act. That's an inner conflict, or a man versus self conflict. Right? It doesn't have to be a man, right? It could be any person having this trouble making a decision or some kind of inner conflict. Okay, and then we have man versus nature. So this is when people are in conflict with their natural environment. The fire is, from the story, is a great example of man versus nature, right? The fire happened, there wasn't anything that they could do. Man versus society, this is when people are in conflict with the society that they live in. So maybe they're trying to change something that they don't like, such as a policy or a law. So there's definitely all kinds of conflict in the story. We've got our man versus man, right? Bill Young versus the police officers, right? But that's also a man versus society as well down here, right? Because he pushed the limits of the law in order to be successful in business. And if we talk about man versus self, well, remember when you had the young police officers that weren't sure what to do with him, right? So the young officers wanted to quit because they couldn't figure out how to deal with Bill Young, the situation. And then, of course, the man versus nature that I mentioned earlier, how there was a fire and the store burned down. So we can keep this information in mind when we go to answer these questions. And there's 2 example questions. So here's question 1. In 1 to 2 complete sentences, explain a man versus man conflict that happened in the story. Your answer should name the characters involved and provide at least one detail about how they struggled. Okay, so we have to say who, and we have to say what it was they were arguing about. Okay. So here's an example answer. A man versus man conflict in the story was between Bill Young and the police. The police were trying to stop Bill from having animals at his store. So you've got the people named, and you've got what was going on between them. Okay, second example question. In 1 to 2 complete sentences, explain a man versus society conflict that happened in the story. Your answer should name the character involved and provide at least one detail about how that character struggled. Right? So I'm using man versus society as an example here because that's really what most of the story was about, right? So a man versus society conflict in the story involves Bill Young. He struggled to keep his store the way that he wanted it, even though he was accused of breaking laws. So just keep in mind that when you're answering questions about conflict, I know for sure that you have to answer a question about man versus man, but you might have a different kind of conflict that you have to answer in the second one. I think you might have to answer a question about an inner conflict. So remember that an inner conflict is what a conflict that they're experiencing within themselves, right? Maybe they're struggling with something in their own heads or not sure what to do in a situation. There could be lots of different kinds of inner conflicts. So just keep that in mind. This is just an example, okay? Okay, so next we have the plot. Right? So this is actually the last little bit that you'll need to know to answer questions for assignment 16. And then I'll talk about theme, but there aren't any questions about theme for assignment 16. I just wanted to mention it because later on in the course, when you get to assignment 23, it will be helpful to understand what the theme is. Okay, so talk about plot. The plot is the action that happens from the beginning to the end. Some of you might have learned about a plot line. Okay, so here we have a plot line. I don't think there's a plot line in your textbook, so you get a bonus here. But anybody that can't see this plot line picture, we have like a straight line, and then it goes up and down like a pyramid, and then a straight line. So at the beginning of the story, you have something called the exposition, right? You notice how there was all that explanation at the beginning, kind of like setting the stage, letting us know about the characters and where they're at and stuff like that. And then stuff starts to happen. And that stuff that starts to happen is called the rising action. And then you get to a point that's what you could call as being the most important part of the story in terms of action, right? In terms of the plot. Another way that you can think about it is it's like the turning point. So we can call that the climax. And then you have the falling action. So after the climax happens, things start to calm down a bit. But a few more things happen before things are completely calmed down, and that's called the falling action. And at the very end, we have some kind of resolution. Now, in this story, you notice it said that further confrontation was avoided, right? Frontier justice prevailed and further confrontation was avoided. But then it sort of hints that something might happen again in the future. And that's fine. That's completely fine. We have a little bit of extra information, so kind of like there's a chance for a sequel, I guess you could say. But remember that this story is specifically about Bill Young and his store, right? So the story ended, and then we had a little extra stuff at the end. And I mean, that's possible. I will tell you though that when you read the story for, it's called Thanksgiving in your textbook, when you read Thanksgiving, it has a definite end to it, okay? There's no extra little information at the end like in this story. There's so many things about the story that I loved, especially the conflict and the character development. I had to share this story with you. I'm so glad that I did. Okay, so just remember that the plot is what keeps the story moving. Characters have to do something. The plot is what the characters do. If you can understand the plot, then you can explain the important events in the order that they happen. So I'm just going to go back and just show you what I did to find this information in the story. Kind of sort of going back too far. So remember, there wasn't any sort of plot on the first page, right? Nothing happened yet. We just had a whole bunch of description. Then on the second page, I started underlining things, right? So this is a strategy that you could do. You could keep in mind that you're looking for the main things that people did, and you could underline them. And of course, later, when you answer the question, you'll have to describe these things in your own words, and that's what we're going to do next. I just wanted to show you that I've actually used a strategy here of underlining the important plot points. And you can see even on this second page, I have things underlined. And just for your interest, this is my opinion after reading the story, right? So remember, he went to court and he fought, right, in court. And for me, the climax of that plot is when he won his court case, right? If he hadn't have won his court case, then the resolution could not have started. So it was sort of the point, it was like at the turning point, right? He won his case and then things could calm down after that. So that's, now don't worry, you don't have to answer a question about climax. I just thought it would be interesting for me to note where I thought the climax of the story was. Okay, so let's go back now to this question about plot. So here's our example question. It says, list what you think are the most important details in the story in order, starting after the beginning of the story to the end of the story. Right? So I did some underlining, and the key here is you want to answer each thing that happened in a full sentence, and you want to use your own words. Right? So this is what I've come up with. Now, the good news, here's the good news. When you do assignment 16, and you read the story in the textbook and you answer the questions, you'll only have to list 5 things in total, right? And here I've listed 10 because a lot more stuff happened in the story than what will happen in Thanksgiving. So actually, you'll get a bit of a break when you do assignment 16 on your own. But another reason I really wanted to share this example is because so many things happen, and it creates a really good opportunity for me to explain how plot works. Okay, so this is what happened. This is how I would explain what happened in order from start to finish. So the first thing, so I just numbered it here, 1 to 10 here. So 1, Bill bought a goat and a donkey. 2, he was charged with keeping the animals illegally. 3, he bailed out his animals and placed an ad in the paper. 4, people came to see the store. 5, Bill got to keep the goat because of a legal loophole. 6, he went to trial and got to keep the donkey too. 7, Bill got to keep the pickle barrels even though the health authority disagreed. 8, the store burned down. 9, Bill kept selling while he rebuilt his store. 10, Bill and the authorities sort of reached a resolution, and they avoided further conflict. All right, so those are the main events that happened. And remember that it doesn't matter how Bill feels, or it doesn't matter how the other characters feel. How people feel, that's related to a question about conflict, right? This question is about plot. So we're just looking at the things that happened, the things that kept the story moving, what the characters did, or what happened to them, right? I mean, the store burned down. That's something that happened to them, right? So just keep that in mind here, right? And you definitely want to go in the order that the events happened. That's how you want to list them. All right, so we're getting close. Let me just talk about theme, and then I'll have a quick reminder before I say goodbye for the evening. So let's talk about this last short story element. And again, I'm talking about the theme because understanding the theme will help you later on in the course when you have to summarize a short story. Okay, so we're just worrying about reading comprehension for now, but I do want to take this opportunity to explain what the theme is all about. So the theme is what the story is about. It is the overall idea that the story explains. You need to read the whole story before you can figure out what the theme is. Some examples of theme include overcoming challenge, quest for power, quest for discovery, importance of family, nature as beauty, and coming of age. There are many more possibilities. And the other thing that I'll say is everybody who reads a story will interpret the story a little bit differently. So you'll have a different opinion of what the story was about. And as long as it makes sense, as long as it's possible, then you don't have to worry about being incorrect, right? So let me give you some different ways of explaining this from Young's General Store. So there are different ways that you could explain the theme in this story, and as I said, that's okay. And it's also possible for a story to have more than one theme, right? So you might read it and you might see a theme, and then somebody else might read it and they might see a different theme. Or a third person could read it and they could see more than one theme, right? So there's lots of ways that you could explain what a story is all about. So here, let me continue. So the point of understanding the theme is so that you can quickly explain what the whole story is about. So this story, Young's General Store, was kind of about overcoming challenges, and it was also about a struggle for power. So you could say that the story was about how Bill Young overcame legal challenges to be successful in business. Or you could say that the story was about how Bill Young was victorious in a power struggle between himself and the authorities as he succeeded in business. Right? I mean, remember, he dealt with that fire, and I mean, the police were there the whole time trying to stop him, right? So maybe when you read it and when you interpret it, you say, well, it's about the power struggle. That's what it is. Okay, you'd be perfectly correct. Or you might say, oh, no, I didn't really notice the police that much. I feel like he just overcame a whole bunch of challenges. That would be correct too. Or maybe you feel like it's both of these things. You could include them both. Okay. So the theme in our example story is not the same as the theme in the story that you will read for assignment 16, right? But that's okay, right? Because you don't have to answer any questions about theme, right? And I wouldn't want to give you exactly the same theme anyway. That would make it too easy, right? So as I said before, when you have to do a short story summary later in the course, maybe you could go back and review this information about the theme. It might be helpful. All right, so this is where we're finishing. Just a few closing remarks before I go. I hope that you enjoy reading Thanksgiving, and that's what you'll be reading. You'll read Thanksgiving in your textbook before you do assignment 16. So you read Thanksgiving in your textbook, and then you do the questions in your workbook. Right, so even though we talked about a different story tonight, you can still use the examples that I've shared with you. So you'll need to answer the questions in your own words, and you need to use full sentences. So my examples should help with that, right, especially when it comes to writing full sentences. So, and also remember to complete assignment 15. We talked about that at the very beginning, right, and that's the second part of the newspaper article comprehension exercise. Okay, and if you're wondering, well, you know, assignment 14, that came before 15. Yes, we talked about that in class on Wednesday, May the 3rd. So we just ran out of time that Wednesday. Okay, so this is what you want to work on before our next class. So assignment 15 is on textbook pages 29 and 30, and the workbook pages 27 to 28. I have one more thing to say after this too. And assignment 16. You have textbook pages 31 to 36 and workbook pages 29 to 33. So that's exactly where you find what you need. The last thing I want to say is that there is no class on Wednesday, May 10th. Okay, so 2 days from now, there's no class. I'm away, and there's just too much to do. But we're still covering everything that we need to cover in the course. So on Wednesday, if you tune in, this class will be replayed. So if anybody missed tonight's class, you'll hear it again on Wednesday. All right, so try to finish up assignments 15 and 16 before our next class, and remember that our next class will be on Monday, May 15th, right? Because we're just going to replay tonight's class on Wednesday because there's no class on the 10th. Right, so the next time I see you will be Monday, May 15th. I'd like to thank everybody who is listening this evening, and have a great night. All right, thanks. Bye.